If you know how to use layers in Photoshop, you already know how to use Substance 3D Painter. Of course, there are some more advanced stuff that you can do in 3D Painter, but the basics are very similar. So let's build a material in Photoshop that you can use in 3D Painter and you'll see how familiar it feels. Hey, if you're new around here, my name is Pablo Munoz. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists level up their skills in the world of 3D, all in a way that is fun, clear, and actually doable. So in this video, I want to show you how you can translate your Photoshop skills into Substance 3D Painter. So if you're not familiar with 3D Painter, that's basically a texturing software or texturing authoring software that allows you to create amazing textures in 3D for your 3D assets. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Alright, so here we are in Substance 3D Painter, and this is the texturing software tool that I was talking about. If you're not familiar with it, it is basically a fantastic way to create awesome textures for 3D. So this is a character that comes with Painter as well, so you can just load this app. So on a side note, if you want to do that, you can just go to File, Open Sample, and it's called the Mid Matte. All you need to do is select it and click on Open. So that's what I have here. And I've set up this very simple material, which is some sort of like orangey terracotta paint, which, you know, if you look at it from the distance, it seems like a very simple material, right? Just like an orange color. But if you get closer, it has all of these tiny details, little dents, little scratches, the roughness variation. So not everything is specular at the same level. There's some dirt as well, some scratches. So it makes for a much more rich and interesting material, right? So this is what we're going to set up in Photoshop. And believe me, all of this has been done in Photoshop. So just for comparison, so that you can see how much difference there is between a material that has all these level of details compared to a simple color. Let's go ahead and switch this. This is a plain material. It has a very similar specular level, and it has one single color, but it doesn't have any variation in the roughness. It's kind of like a perfect plastic material, right? And what I want to show you is that you can do something that looks a lot more complex, like this one, with very little effort, just if you know how to set things up in Photoshop. All right, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. And these are pretty much the basis of what you can do in Photoshop and translate into Painter. So on the right-hand side, let's collapse this. I have all my layers. So I have a bunch of fill layers, and each fill layer has a mask. So it is allowing to see some of these details. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off. So we start with a base layer. Then I have, I'm also gonna turn off these masks for the time being. So I have a fill layer that has a slightly different color. And then I have a mask. So if I press the Alt key and click on the mask in Photoshop, you'll be able to see it. So very simple mask. It's just a bunch of like splatters. Yeah, kind of like a grungy map. And anything that is lighter towards the white color is going to be more visible. Anything that is darker is not going to be visible, right? So those are the basics of Photoshop in terms of masking. And that's, believe me, that's all you need to know to understand Painter and to understand the complexity that you can do in Painter with the materials. So again, just a fill layer, and it has this texture. So hopefully you can see it here in the recording, but I'll get a little bit closer here. So if I turn this on and off, all we have is just a slight variation, kind of like a decoloration of that red. Let's do the same thing with the next one. So I want to open this one up, and that one is even more subtle. I don't think that you can actually see it in the recording, but there's some kind of like highlights, and that is due to this layer right here, right? So this mask. So anything that is white is what you can see. Anything that is dark is not. And that's the concept for the rest. So I'm just going to go quickly and show you. These are a bunch of scratches. This one is kind of like a grungy noise, and that helps to unify things with this material. And then finally, we have another noise, right? With this layer. Okay, so this complexity of this material, that's something that you can build with a few layers, and you can do as many as you want. This is just a simple example, right? And another thing that I like to do is add a hue saturation value. Again, and this is just to draw some of the similarities here in Photoshop in terms of the effects that you will find in Painter as well. So this one allows me to, let's go ahead and open up the properties. This one allows me to change that hue so that I can change the color of this material. All right, so let's go ahead and build something similar so that you know how it's done, and then we'll move that into Photoshop. So the way that you build this type of things in Photoshop is very simple, and that translates into Painter. So let's do that. I have a document that is, let's double check, it's 1024 by 1024, and I have a background. So let's click on this icon right here, and let's add a solid color. So that allows you to select a specific color. I'm gonna try to do something similar just to give you the example that I created. So something around there. Maybe even darker, right? And this is going to be our base, right? When you create a fill layer, it comes already with a mask. Now, because this is gonna be the base layer, I'm gonna double click and call it base. And I'm gonna actually get rid of the background now. I don't need it. So we have a single layer, which is our base. Let's go ahead and duplicate that. So Control J in Photoshop to duplicate it. And I'm going to double click on this and choose something slightly lighter, maybe more towards the yellowish tone and maybe a bit more desaturated. All right, so something slightly different. Now, if I click on the mask itself, I can go ahead and paint it. So let's select the paintbrush or any brush that you like. And I'm just going to use a black color. As you can see here, that's what I have selected. And wherever I paint, I'm basically hiding the effect of this layer. Now, something I like to do is, because I like to work with tileable textures so that I can reuse this in multiple projects, is to go to the View menu here in Photoshop and click on Pattern Preview. So if you didn't know about this, this is a fantastic little tip. This allows you to visualize things in a pattern mode. So you can do like tileable textures like that. So what I'll do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose a different brush, maybe something like this. And I'll just create it like some splatter, right? That's kind of like what I had. So you see, I'm just hiding a little bit of those colors. I can actually change that to maybe almost like a mid-gray so that I don't change things as much. So you see, if I jump into my mask again, pressing the Alt key and clicking on it, there's some areas that are lighter. And that's what is giving me this kind of like interesting variation. All right, so I'm going to paint a little bit more like that. And in fact, let's change this to a lighter tone just to make things more interesting. And this alone, just a couple of layers, already makes a huge difference. All right, so now that I see this, it might be a little bit too much. So I can use the opacity in Photoshop and reduce the intensity of that. So you'll see it's very, very subtle. All right, so I'm just gonna do one more just to emphasize this entire process, but it is more of the same. I'm gonna click again here, solid color. That's our fill color or a fill layer, the equivalent. And I'm gonna make sure I have something similar. Let's go for that. Again, we can change this later. By the way, this is another thing I want to show you, that this process that I'm showing you here is non-destructive in a way, so that we can click on this color and change it at any time, right? So that is very, very important because that's how I work in Painter, and that's how I would recommend that you work in Painter. All right, so for this one, I'm going to jump into the mask, and I'm going to use, let's find something else, maybe this Kyle Ultimate Pencil Brush. And for this one, I'm going to start just painting some scratches. Now, this one's going to be like really hard to see, so I'm just going to exaggerate things and get a bit closer. Obviously, the more scratches that you do, the older that the material would look like. So I'm doing this really, really quickly. I would advise you that you spend a little bit more time on this than what I'm doing here, because this was a little bit random. But anyway, this is just to create the mask itself. So now you can see those scratches. Now, I want to actually have the white color where the scratches is. So this is just to show you another similarity. So if I hold Control and I can invert that very easily. And now I can just go ahead and select the color that I want, and I can go for maybe a more desaturated, lighter color. So in a way, this is how you set things up in Painter. So you have fill layers, and then you have masks that drive what you can see from those layers. So you have the base, you have this kind of like generic noise, and then you have some of these scratches. So this is exactly the same thing that I have set up in here, right? It's just that I use different types of effects to generate this, right? But it's exactly the same thing. All right, so how do we set this up in Painter? Now, the truth is that if you understand black and white images or grayscale values, you understand anything that has to do with texturing. And that's how Painter works. If you know what the light values are meant to be doing and the darker values are meant to be doing, then you understand how you can build a complex material really easy. So all we need from Photoshop is to export the masks that we created, and then we can recreate the same thing in 3D Painter. So let's do that. So because these ones are masks, what I like to do is hold the Alt key to access those masks. I can hold the Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, and then I'm going to create a new document. So Control N, and I'm just going to hold Control and V. So I'll paste that in there, and I'll do the same thing with the other ones. Hold the Alt key to access the mask, Control A, Control C, and Control V, and I can repeat the process for all those masks. So I've already done that, and I have them in here. And then once I have them as a document, I can just go ahead and save them as a JPEG or a PNG image. So I just want to show you that I already have those masks. So I exported the first one. So this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And that's all we need. So now we can go back into Painter and we can go ahead and start building our material. So let's go ahead and delete all of this. So I'm going to select these layers. By the way, this is your layer stack in case you're not familiar with Painter yet. I want to click on delete to remove it all together. Now, one thing that is important to remember about Painter is that it is more advanced, but that doesn't mean that it's more complex, right? The advanced just means that you have more control over more things. That's all, right? And obviously that brings in some complexity, but if you understand the basics, you will be able to navigate this really easy. So we're gonna keep things simple. I'm gonna go ahead and click on this icon right here. So this little paint bucket that is very similar to the paint bucket in Photoshop, this creates a fill layer. So this fill layer is the equivalent to what we have in here. Let's go back in here. So that's the equivalent to one of these ones, right? This fill color. And if we click on this one, we can choose any color that we want. We can change the hue, all of that good stuff. Is the same thing in Painter. So when you click on this layer or you select that layer, you have the color. You can click on this one and you can select any color that you want. Now, when I say that Painter is a bit more advanced, it's because it has some things that are called channels. So it has the height, the roughness, the metalness, and the normal. So these channels allow you to control different things of the material, so different properties separately. So for example, if you want something really, really shiny, you can take the roughness and push it down. And now you see it is a very reflective material. And the reflectivity or the shininess of this material has nothing to do with the color itself. So it is independent. You can change the color to something blue or a completely different color. And the roughness, it remains the same. Likewise, if you want to make things a little bit more rougher and make things metallic, you can push the metallic all the way to 1. And you see how now this looks like a metallic, kind of like car paint. So you can make it more like a full metal, right? So again, this has nothing to do with the color. We just have the ability to control all of these things separately, all of these properties of the material. So we're gonna keep things super simple, don't worry. So I just wanna show you that this is, when I refer to as Painter being more advanced, I just refer to this more sort of granular control that you have on building your material. But again, let's keep things super simple. We're just gonna deal with the color for now. Now, to make sure that we match exactly what we have in Photoshop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Painter and I'm going to set it to the left-hand side of my monitor. And then we have the Photoshop file here on the left-hand side. So just to make things a little bit easier to see, what I'll do is in Painter, I'm going to press the Tab key and that goes into this full screen mode. So now we can go ahead and click on this icon right here that is going to bring in the layers. I'm going to click and drop this around here so you can move these panels and maybe make them a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the properties. So I'm going to click on that one and let's turn this off and I'm just going to put this in here. All right. So I'm basically trying to set up a very similar layout as what I have in Photoshop so that you can follow along. So on the right-hand side, we have the layers, same as Photoshop right here. And then on the top, we have the properties, same as in Photoshop. All right, so with the fill layer selected, I'm going to call it base. And I'm going to select this red color in Photoshop first. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper here and I'm going to drag it to the red color. So you see now we have that first layer. In fact, let's go ahead and go one by one here so that we can match what we're doing. All right, so we now have that red color. Let's see, we can actually add, let's have some more space. Great. So let's repeat the process so that you see how easy this is. I want to click on the fill layer and this one is going to be the next one. All right, so let's turn this on and turn off the mask. You can press the Shift key and turn off the mask. That's, a Photoshop command. Let's click on the eyedropper and select this one. All right, so now we have the same sort of layer. All right, so now we have exactly the same color. Now, we obviously need the mask, but just to speed this up, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead and create all of the fill layers in the same way that I just showed you. All right, so I've created all the fill layers and they match exactly the colors that we have here. Now, the complexity of this and, any material that you create is all about the masking. So I'm going to bring in the mask. So I don't need this anymore as a reference. So I'm going to go back into full screen so we have more real estate here to play around with this material. Okay. So the way that you import resources into Painter, you can just drag and drop them into your library of assets, which is this one right here. If you don't see this window or you see it somewhere else, all you need to do is go to Windows, Views, and select it from here. All right, so how do you bring those resources into Painter? It's actually really, really simple. All I'm gonna do is I have them in my desktop. I'm gonna drag and drop 5 assets into the library. It doesn't matter where, and I'm gonna drop it in there. So we get this pop-up to import the resources and we just need to define what these are. So we just need to select everything by clicking and dragging. And where it says undefine, we're gonna click on that and select texture. All right, let's go ahead and leave this as current session and click on import. And you see that we now have those masks in here. So they're simple black and white images that they're tileable because the way that we set them up in Photoshop, but you can absolutely do anything in any software that you want, in any way that you want to create this. You can do this in Procreate on the iPad. You can do this in any way that you want, as long as they are black and white images and hopefully tileable. All right, so the way that you create masks in Painter is actually really simple. I'm gonna toggle everything off and again, start with the first one, which is the same as this one right here. So it's the first layer, or the first mask, which is this one, all right? So the way that you create mask is you select the fill layer, you go to this icon right here, which is very similar to the one we have in Photoshop, right? This one right here. So I'm gonna click on that and create a black mask. All right, so this black mask doesn't have anything, and this is one of the really powerful things about Painter, that you can actually have a non-destructive workflow all within the mask. So the simplest thing is to create kind of like a fill layer for the mask. This is going to make sense in just a second. But essentially, we want to have like a fill layer. So with the mask selected, and you see that because it has the blue outline, we can go to this magic wand, and you can click on Add Fill. So now you'll see that we have the same sort of icon that we had before for the color layers, but now this is living within the mask, meaning that we can choose to add anything in here, but it's going to be a black and white image. So if you select this fill, you see we have this empty grayscale, and I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the first mask in there. Done. So now if I get closer, you see we have something very, very similar to what we have here in Painter. Let's turn this off and let's go one by one. Right? So we have the same sort of setup, but in Painter. Of course, in Painter, we have the roughness, but that's something that we can control from the base layer. So we can just jump back to the base, enable the roughness, and we can control that. So I'm going to push it a little bit more just so that we can see things a bit better. You don't have to follow along with that. All right, so let's go back in here. Now, going back to that sort of familiarity that I mentioned with Photoshop, you can hold the Alt key in Painter to access the mask. And now we can really see what we're doing. That's exactly the same thing that in Photoshop, you can hold the Alt key and access the mask. You can also press the Shift key to toggle off the mask temporarily. And that's the same thing as doing it in Photoshop. So Shift click the mask, that turns that on and off. Same thing in Painter, right? So pretty cool stuff. All right, so I know that this, if it is the first time that you're doing it, it might be a little bit convoluted. So I'm just going to repeat the process, and you'll see once you do it a few times, it's very, very easy. And in fact, I'm going to show you something that is even easier now that I have set this up. So I'm going to enable the second one. This one, the second one is this one right here. So I'm going to click on Mask, Black Mask, Magic Wand, Add Fill, and then I'm just going to drag and drop this in here. Right? So now we have that one. Again, this one is super subtle, but there's something going on here. Hopefully you can see it. Very, very subtle. All right, so now that I have set up 2 or 1, or as long as you have 1, it's okay. You can click on the mask, and then you can hold the Alt key and drag this in here. So when you hold the Alt key and drag it, that's duplicating it and adding the same mask that we have here, but in the next layer. So in Photoshop, just to be consistent with this workflow, if I wanted to duplicate, let's say, this mask in another layer, what I can do is hold the Alt key and drag and drop it in there. So it will just be added in there as well as in here. So let's undo that, because obviously that's not what I'm doing. But it's the same thing in Painter. So now I duplicated this. All I need to do is replace it with that mask 3. So I'm going to duplicate it there. And now we have those scratches. Don't worry, they look a little bit bigger. I'll cover that in just a second. But let's go ahead and finalize this by adding another one. So Alt, drag and drop. And I'm going to replace this one with number 4. And then hold the Alt key, drag and drop. And I'm going to replace that with number 5. Excellent. All right, so we now have basically exactly the same thing that we have in here, right? But you see that it looks slightly different. This one looks a bit darker than this one. And the reason is because we also have, as I mentioned, the opacity and the blending modes. So I can't remember exactly what it is. So these two. So we have this at 100% opacity. We have this one at 71, this one 100, and this one at 41, and it's set to lighten. All right, so let's start with the simple stuff. With this one, it's set to normal in the blending mode, and it's set to 71 opacity. So I'm going to do the same thing. The third one, I'm going to select that here, and here on the right hand side of the layer, I want to set this to 70. So let's click here, 71. So that's exactly what we have in this other setup. And the fourth one, this one is set to 41 opacity, and is also, the blending mode is set to lighten. So the blending modes that you have here in Photoshop, you can also find them in here. So let's do the same. Let's go ahead and set this to lighten, which is here. So by clicking on this drop down, and then let's go ahead and change the opacity to 41. There we go. So now if we draw a comparison with what we have here and in Photoshop, it's exactly the same thing. The only difference is that, the details in here, they look a little bit too big. And that's gonna be the next thing that I wanna show. So because this is a 3D software ultimately, and we're painting textures in a 3D object, we need to adjust how those images are tiled, which basically means that, like if we were here in Photoshop, it just means that we need to repeat this more times so that we have like smaller details. So to do that, I'm going to start with the one at the bottom. So I'm going to select this one, and let's turn everything off for a second. I'm going to enter in the mask, so holding the Alt key as I already showed you, and selecting this fill layer in the mask, I'm going to go to the tile, and I'm going to type 4. So that seems to be like a good one. And I'm going to repeat the process. So number 4 for all the tiles. So select this one, 4, make sure that I turn that on. This one is going to be 4. So you see we have more of these smaller details. So we're just tiling this 4 and 4. All right. So you see how cool this is looking, right? All right, so far we just translated what we had in Photoshop, but into Painter. And at this point, it's pretty much the same thing, but we managed to match it, one to one. And you might be thinking, well, if this is all you're showing me, it's a lot easier for me to do it in Photoshop because I already know Photoshop. However, now that we have this setup, and because it is a non-destructive workflow, we will be able to adjust certain things and play with the properties of this material and from each individual layer separately, which is going to make this a lot more interesting and definitely something that in Photoshop will be very, very hard to replicate, or at least with this workflow. All right, so let's go back here into full screen mode. So what I'll do is I'm going to start playing around with a few things. The first thing, and it's obviously the one that causes the most obvious change, is to play with the height, which is kind of like adding a little bit of depth to the material. So I'm going to do that with the scratches, which is this one right here. And by the way, you can also double click here and let's call it scratches. There we go. So I want to take this one, select the layer itself, and remember these materials that I mentioned before. I'm going to click on rough and I'm going to click on hide. So if I select the roughness, you see we can go ahead and change how much this is affecting the material. Because these are scratches, I'm going to leave them around here, which is slightly different. And with the hide, I'm going to push this down. So I'm going to exaggerate things, so just so you can see it. All right, so what's happening here is that there is a black and white image now, which is our mask with the scratches, affecting how much these details are embedded into the material. So all of these white lines that are the scratches are actually pushing things in. If I take this slider to the other side, it's going to push things out. Now, in terms of texturing, and this is something that I tell my students all the time, if you do something like this, yeah, it is very visible, but then it becomes like a bad texturing, right? And when it comes to texturing, it's all about the subtleties. So I want to make sure that this is visible, but it's very, very subtle. So I'm going to push it to maybe 0 or minus 0.05, right? That gives you already an idea of that. And if you hold the Shift key and right click, that allows you to rotate the light in your environment and you will be able to see the effect of those scratches. I will even go even lower than this, but this is just a good starting point. All right, so you see that now in this layer for the scratches, we have the height, so we can control how deep those scratches are, and then we can control how shiny those scratches are as well with the roughness. Great. So now we're going to go ahead and tweak the roughness variation a little bit, and that's ultimately what creates a very, very complex and more realistic effect. So I'll do that with the first layer. Let's go ahead and turn everything off. So we have the base layer. This is going to give us the base rough. So how rough the material that you are going to create, if it is like in its pure state, like brand new, how it would look like. So it could be like a matte finish or a bit more shiny. It's totally up to you. Because I'm going to create some kind of like plastic material or paint, I'm just going to leave it something like that. So if you want to follow along, 0.2 is fine. Or let's go for 0.3, something a bit more generic. All right, the next one, I'm going to click on that and I'm going to click on roughness. All right, so for this one, we can push this all the way to 1 just to show you the difference. And obviously, because we are using this mask, we are telling the software, hey, we also want to have different color, but we also want to mask out the roughness. So we have different in roughness. This is really, really cool. What I like to do is I want to visualize it. So I usually push things all the way up or all the way down just to visualize what I'm doing. And then I knock it down a little bit. So I'm going to go for something very, very close to what we have. There we go. So it's just a tiny bit more, or a tiny less rough. Sorry, a tiny bit more rough than the other one, right? So you see there's a little bit of variation in there. And again, it's just about the subtleties. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing with the next one. So select the next one, enable roughness. And like I said, I like to push this all the way. And you see we have these spaces, these gaps, and I'm gonna knock it down a bit like so. Very, very subtle. Let's do the same thing with scratches. We already have this. And like I said, this is a little bit too strong for my taste. So I'm gonna go back. Again, this is the beauty of the non-destructive workflow. I'm going to set it to minus 0.2. That's a little bit better. And the final one, this one right here, let's add roughness and we can make it a bit rougher. All right, so you see, hopefully you can see the level of detail that we're achieving by tweaking all of these channels independently. All right, I think I want to make it a bit rougher. All right, and finally, this is the last one. Let's add some roughness and let's push that up. Okay. Now you see that when I added this layer, things changed quite a bit. So, these points are a bit like orangey. If you want to change that, because it is non-destructive, you just need to select this, select the color, and maybe just go for more of a darker tone. That's it, right? And again, because it is non-destructive, if you wanted to use this as a way to add bumps to your material, you can do the same thing. You can enable the height information, and then you can push that height up, and now we have like a little bit of a bumpy surface. So let's go ahead and do that just for fun. I'm just going to make it really subtle. So 0.01, very, very subtle stuff, right? So we now have that subtle bumpiness with a color that is a bit, more like a brownish tone and the rest. So that makes up the material and makes it a lot more interesting to look at than what we had in Photoshop. Now we're gonna wrap this video up with a couple more things that are very, very important. Again, just to draw the same similarities that we have in Photoshop. And my goal here is just that if you know Photoshop, and like I said at the beginning of the video, you already know Painter in a way that you can draw these connections between a software that is probably more familiar to you and another software that it is more complex or more advanced, I should say. All right, so what I want to do now is create that hue saturation effect. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this one to remove those filters, and I'm going to filter by this icon right here, which are the filters, right? And in the search, I'm going to type for HSL. There we go. So HSL perceptive. So this is the equivalent to the hue saturation value or hue saturation lightness in Photoshop. So I'm going to drag and drop this in here on top, and you see it just gets added, and it's called HSL perceptive. So it's just like an empty layer that has the effects in here. So that is the same thing as having this hue saturation. Let's move this a little bit. This hue saturation value in here. You have hue, saturation, and lightness. So HSL. All right. So in Painter, we can do the same thing. We can select it, and the hue, we can just change it to maybe like an orangey tone. We can make it more saturated and darken it up. How cool is that? And this is the beauty of this process, that anything that is below this effect, we maintain the different in height, we maintain the different in roughness, the different in color. We're just changing the hue of this material. Not only that, but we can also do other things like we have in Photoshop. So if I click on this icon, which are the filters in Painter, it's exactly the same icon. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on levels, for example, right? So we now have the ability to contrast this as well. So in Painter, we can do exactly the same thing. We have this layer that has kind of like our adjustments. So we can add a stack of effects in the same layer. So I'm going to click on the magic one, click on levels, and now we have these levels that allows you to change the base color, right? So we can contrast that base color. So this is exactly the same thing as of what I'm doing here in Photoshop. The difference really is that because again, it is a much more advanced software in the sense that it has much more granularity in terms of what you can adjust. We can tell the software, look, we don't want to actually contrast the color. We're happy with the color. We actually want to contrast the roughness. So we can select that from this dropdown. Let's expand this a bit. So we can click on the roughness, and we can actually crunch those values of that roughness, so that the difference between the areas that are shiny and that are not changes straight away, right? So this is the beauty of this workflow. All right, so I'm gonna, let's just remove the levels. I don't need it. I just wanted to show you a little bit more of that. All right, to wrap up this video, I'm gonna show you something that is really, really cool, and probably one of the reasons that you might even have heard of this 3D Painter, which are the generators and how to use the mesh maps to draw some really cool effects really, really easy. Now, keep in mind that this is something that as you progress, let's say in your journey with 3D Painter, you will discover and you start to play around with it. But it doesn't change the fact that if you know how to control black and white images and basically mask, you can control, or you have a lot of control over the actual look of your material. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna click on a new layer. Again, you already know how to do this. I'm gonna enable roughness, and I'm gonna enable metal. Again, you also know how to do this as well. So this layer, I'm gonna make it metallic. So I'm gonna take the metal and put it all the way up. And for the color, I'm gonna change it to something more like mid-gray. And I'm also going to increase or decrease the roughness rather, like so. So basically what we created here is just a metallic layer. So I'm gonna double click on it and call it metal. All right. So let's say that we wanna combine these two materials, because that's what ultimately they are, right? One is a metal material and the other one has kind of like our paint or plastic material. So for the metal material, I'm gonna select that, and I'm gonna click on a mask. Again, you also know how to do that, just a black mask, and that basically hides it. And if we follow the process that we've been doing, the next step would be going to the magic wand, click on a fill layer, and then you can bring in a black and white image, right? That's not what I'm gonna do now. Let's remove that. Instead, I'm gonna click on add generator. So this one right here allows you to select something that would work with some of the mesh maps. So in other words, it's gonna take into account the crevices, the ambient occlusion, the general shape of the volumes, and you will be able to drive that black and white mask with that. So once you have this generator here, right now it's empty, we're gonna click on this generator here, and we're gonna go for something simple. Let's go for metal edgeware. So click on this one, and straight away, you see the difference that this has. So the cool thing is that we can click on these properties, so the wear level, and we can reduce that. So if we just want a little bit of scratches around the edges of this model, or we have maybe something that is really, really scratched out. We can change the contrast, add more grunge, change the scale of that grunge. So you can play around with all of these sliders and find a balance of these materials that you want. Now, the last thing I want to show you is that, of course, we have this, really obvious difference between the two materials, but there is barely any difference in terms of the height. So if you're thinking about this being a metal piece and have some, plastic paint on top of it, there will be a very tiny bit of height. So the way that we solve this is very easy as well. We can click on the metal layer here, and we can enable height, right? That's the same thing that we enable for the scratches here, if you remember. So we can control how much we are actually pushing that metal in and out. So I'm gonna push it in, but it's gonna be super subtle. So again, I'm gonna go for 0.02. And even that, I think it will be a little bit too much. So I'll go for 0.01. All right, so we have the properties of that material independently from this other material that we created before. All right, so that is about it. Now, if you want to apply the same layers or the same material to everything else in your project, in this case, we're just working on the head of this character, we can go ahead and actually, let's delete this bottom one. We never use this. That's kind of like the background in Photoshop. We're going to select everything, hold Control and G. And just to continue with the spirit of this tutorial, you could do the same thing here. You can select everything, Control G. Actually, we have to make this background a layer. Select everything, Control G, that creates a folder. That's exactly what we have here. And we can call it a simple material test, right? And I'm gonna right click on it, and I'm gonna go to instantiate across texture sets. Now, this one is another thing on its own, but I just wanted to show you because once you finish with your material, you can add it to other pieces. But this is basically talking about the different texture sets that you have, which are essentially different objects in your scene. So if I instantiate it, I have the head is the source because that's what we've been working on, but then you have the body and you have the base. So if I click on all, that basically instantiate this material across all the different objects. But the cool thing is that you can go back, let's say, to the generator that we created before, and we can play with the edgeware and it will be added to the entire set of objects. That's why this is super nice and super easy to set up. And if you like this effect, this is probably the most basic thing that I can show you about Painter. So just think about the possibilities of what you can create in this software. All right, so that's it for this video. Hopefully it has been of help. And if you're interested in this type of workflows, make sure that you subscribe and turn on notifications in the channel so that next time that I upload something related to Substance 3D Painter, you get notified. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.